we are doing a follow-up episode on our Alex Murdaugh case that we covered a couple days ago. We got such an amazing response. It's like we typically get, I don't know, like 30 or 40 views on our videos. And this time we got 40,000 views. So I'm like, wow, that's so incredible. And we got so many comments. We're at like, I think 450 comments. So it's really exciting. And so we thought it was probably best to kind of maybe summarize those comments in a follow-up video, as opposed to kind of getting into it deeply into the chat, just because, you know, we have to sort of chart a course about what we're experts in and what we're not. And we're not legal experts. While we do cover addiction medicine stuff, we just speak generally. We're not able to give specific medical advice to people. So we have to sort of be careful about that. But anyhow, I'm just really humbled by the response, and we're really excited to sort of engage the community, right? And we're happy that you enjoyed it, and looking forward to answering your questions about the Alex Murdaugh case. So, okay, I hope you enjoy. Got some really great comments from people, so I thought it would be a good follow-up to just kind of answer some of their amazing questions that they had, and you know, kind of continue it along there.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear people are curious. People want to discuss. People want to share what they know. People want to correct misconceptions, things like that. And some of the stuff, you know, we may be experts of. Some of the stuff around this, especially some of the legal stuff, it's not in our wheelhouse, but we can definitely comment on general substance use principles that may or may not apply to the case.
Perfect. So what I've done is I've picked kind of, I don't know, about I think 10 or 11 of these.
Thank you, JP.
Yeah, these of our comments here, and they're going to be kind of flashing up on the screen as we're doing this, if all the tech works out perfectly. And again, a special shout out to everyone that made a comment that gave us the content for this. So let's start without further ado with Joyce Tipton.
Great. So with a drug habit like this, would just family and coworkers know something was going on? I've been around drug addiction people for years and can definitely tell when they're high or taking pills.
Yeah, what a great question, right? So, I mean, obviously, some people, yeah, you can tell, right? You know, I don't know what WIP looks like on a Tylenol 3 even, but other people, I could take 10 Tylenol 3s and you wouldn't see it at all. So I think that not everyone is the same.
Yeah, and you know, it's so interesting. So with COVID, what happened was first we switched to phone call appointments, and then we switched to video. And I find I was not so good at telling if someone had been drinking or not. And it just had to do with the medium shift, right? And so when people would come in person, I had better guesses, but not always. Sometimes I didn't know, because we don't always do drug testing and stuff. And I work in this field. Yeah. Right. So, yeah.
So sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, and but yeah. So I think that's does that kind of address Joyce's question?
I think it does, and I think every situation is different. Every person is different, and I think some of this also speaks to tolerance that we talked about last time, right? And so some people can appear to function quite well, even though they're on substances.
Absolutely, yeah. Tolerance is kind of a big underlying thing that's kind of through a lot of these questions. I think there's a lot of tolerance related questions.
Yeah, I mean, I've also had some cases where you do blood work and you only find out after you get the blood work back that they were intoxicated, and sometimes it's at levels that would normally knock somebody out, right? But they're talking, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're joking, and so it's really hard just to tell just by looking at someone whether they've been using substances or not prior to seeing you.
Yeah, and that's a great point actually, because that's something I learned from one of our earlier episodes, where it's your blood alcohol level does not impact your intoxication.
Yeah, like I think we were talking about how some people can actually play pool better when they're intoxicated, right, with a state-dependent learning, and how some people, you'll get a call from the lab saying that, oh, this person's the levels are almost lethal, but they were literally smiling and talking to you and laughing and joking.
All right. Thank you, Joyce, for that question, and let's go to the next one. next one is from Elsa.
Maybe Eliza, maybe?
Could be Eliza, sorry.
If only there was a way to have the names phonetically.
Yes, we could have done that. Bostwick.
Right, so the substances do change the brain, making one unpredictable, opening doors to all kinds of influence.
Yeah, and boy, do we know that, right? I mean...
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of different models, different ways people talk about it. But really what happens with substances, it really hijacks that reward system that people talk about. So like the ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, parts of the amygdala. And all of a sudden, getting that reward is much more important. And then that ability to delay gratification decreases dramatically in terms of that as well. I could almost imagine that being like a full neuroscience talk for it. The unpredictability is, I think it's partially true. It's also that the priorities shift as well. And so whereas for some people without using drugs, they may care about career, family, those kinds of things. And then when the substance use takes hold, sometimes it becomes the most important thing in someone's life, either getting that A process, that reward, or avoiding the B and the withdrawal process.
Yeah, for sure. And as somebody who, I haven't shared my backstory in the previous video, but I, before becoming a case manager, I injected crystal meth every day for about 7 years. And I can tell you that, and I stopped about 6.5 years ago now.
Yeah.
And, but, you know, that recovery path, it's very unique because it took many years before I was fully functioning or back to the level that I am at now, because those first, once I stopped using, it doesn't just go away, right? It was like, my temper was, kind of like this short, right? Anything would, if somebody cut me off, I'm like, oh, like,
Interesting.
And I was never that guy before, right? And, kind of that higher level processing, I wasn't able to do that very much. And, I mean, we know a lot of our folks, a lot of folks stop using and have lasting effects that are residual forever.
Yeah, I mean, if this is personal, you don't have to answer it. I'm really curious, after you stopped using, how long before you felt like you were in control of that anger again?
Well, I think someone told me at actually a talk that you and I went to together that the brain kind of has like 5 years to sort of get its recovery together. And I feel that each 6-month interval, I got better at it, right? Like,
oh, interesting.
And
it's like an ongoing process.
I thought of it as, somebody compared it to, I forget which physician told me this, but saying it was like, think of your grandmother having a stroke, and her recovery is such that she's going to learn certain things, relearn things, but at the end of 5 years, she's pretty well where she's going to be. She's not going to get a lot better at 6 years, 7 years, and 8 years. So, and I kind of took that to heart. I don't know, none of this is.
But for you, it was motivational, right? So that you knew by hearing that this is not your final form, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that just by participating, avoiding substances, living a meaningful life,
things might keep getting better. And so for the patients I support, it's a really interesting takeaway too, because, I stopped for 3 weeks and my life is still shit. Well, yeah, it is, perhaps, but it'll get better, right? And it'll continue to get better, right? And that's something that is worthwhile to look forward to.
Yeah, it makes me almost want to look into it, but they talk a lot about that pause, right? That post-acute withdrawal syndrome, and in the AA and the rehabilitation community, people talk about it a lot. In the medical community, not so much. Like, I've not seen. I mean, I'll have to look into like solid neuroscience papers on what happens during that period and so forth. So, great point, and it was a nice comment because it's a bit of education as well, and there's a lot of knowledge in the audience, and I love it when people share.
100%. So the next commenter is Richard's World Traveler, and this is the question I think a lot of people have been waiting for. But how about the math? On our original video was, is it possible that someone could do $50,000 a week in drugs, and how many milligrams? Richard's asking, how many milligrams can someone take every day without dying?
Yeah, so Richard has two questions in here, right? He has the first question is, how many milligrams can somebody take without dying? And the second part is also he's still able to carry his duties on as an attorney. And a lot of the comments, talked a bit about how certain doses, people wouldn't be able to live. They would stop breathing. And for someone like me or UJP, absolutely, those doses would be enough to knock us out, and we wouldn't live on those doses. And there's a lot of signals to suggest that certain people can tolerate more, especially if they've been using it regularly. And even though we talked a bit about tolerance last time, we didn't do really a deep dive into it. If you look at certain states, certain states in America, maybe like New Mexico or Arizona, things like that, they'll talk about 40 to 80 milligrams of methadone being a good dose. This is in the guidelines for maybe 15 years ago. And when I started working, for somebody with a severe substance use, it usually be around 100, 120 and so forth for it. What happened when the illicit fentanyl hit the market? People's tolerances went through the roof, right? Just unbelievably high, and you had people that were living and functioning and using drugs on a regular basis that were all of a sudden overdosing and dying. And in this new world of fentanyl, one thing that we found is that the doses of methadone people need to be comfortable is a lot higher. Okay. And so I'm regularly hearing from colleagues, instead of that 80 to 100 to 120, people are getting up to 150 to 100 of methadone, and they're still not getting their withdrawal fully covered, and they're also using on top of it. The other thing that's happened that I think it might be interesting for people in the States, it's definitely part of the practice here. In Vancouver, there have been a couple of very, very well-designed studies looking at, methadone versus injectable hydromorphone in terms of feasibility and safety and so forth. And they've also looked at in terms of that versus slow-release oral morphine. And in Vancouver and in Alberta and a little bit in Ontario, they have these injectable opiate agonist therapy treatment programs, right, where people are on injectable opiate agonist treatment. And some of the doses do get quite high. And so let's just do the math. And then the math will be just in terms of morphine equivalents.
Okay.
So here and now, you can have people on...
Could I back you up there?
Yes.
Can you kind of define what a morphine equivalent is?
Yeah, so when we're looking at different drugs, right, so you're looking at hydromorphone, maybe it's an 8 milligram hydromorphone, maybe you're looking at oxycodone, maybe it's a 40 or 80 of oxycodone, maybe you're looking at morphine tablets, morphine extended release or slow release oral morphine, you might be looking at 50 or 100, but not all of them have the same potency, right? And definitely with fentanyl, the things are quite lower. And so one way that we look at potency is through the morphine equivalents, right? And that's
sort of like a standardization. Is that, could you see it as that? Like
It's like, so for example, say if you were on hydromorphone,
yes,
right? And you had some kind of allergic reaction to hydromorphone, or you couldn't be on it anymore for some reason, and we were to switch you to oxycodone, what we would do is we would look at the morphine equivalents, and we can find a table from a medical journal that'll sort of share what those are, right? So if we have 1 milligram of hydromorphone, it's 5 or 6 milligrams of morphine. If we have 1 milligram of oxycodone, it's 1.5 milligrams of morphine. And if we have 1 milligram of morphine, it's 1 milligram of morphine. And if you go to IV, IV is twice as much, right? So 1 milligram of IV morphine or hydromorphone is 2 milligrams of oral morphine or hydromorphone.
Okay.
Right? And so when you look at what someone can tolerate, so in Canada for injectable opiate agonist treatment, you can have people on 150 milligrams of IV hydromorphone twice a day.
Okay.
Or 103 times a day or something like that. And these people are walking, talking, and interacting with you in some way. And so if you take the 300 milligrams of IV hydromorphone, that would be 600 milligrams of oral hydromorphone. And if you multiply it by 6, it's about 3,600 morphine equivalents.
Okay.
Right? 3,600 morphine equivalents. And if you wanted to figure out how much oxycodone that was, like say how much oxycodone 80s that was, so 80 milligrams of oxycodone or OxyContin is about 120 morphine equivalents.
Okay.
So what we're giving there for that a patient who is on 300 milligrams IV hydromorphone a day is about 3,600 morphine equivalents, which is about 30 tablets of the 80 of hydromorphone.
All right. And those individuals also are sometimes using on top of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're sometimes using on top of that. So, I mean, the ones that I see aren't working as a lawyer, but they're walking and talking and doing those kinds of...
they're able to come to an office.
Yeah,
and
they'll
have
come
an
to an
appointment,
office. They can have the substance, get to the pharmacy, all that stuff.
Get there 3 times a day, because these are observed doses, I think, in that, some of those clinics.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? And so it's 3600. And then the other signal to suggest that people have quite a high tolerance is unfortunately one of the things that happened with the Purdue and the marketing. And so there were certain doctors that would go around because in medicine, people are sometimes wired to stop suffering, right? And the marketing around OxyContin and with Purdue was really around pain being the 6th vital sign. And why wouldn't you want to stop somebody's pain? And I've heard stories from doctors that worked around that era, where one doctor was saying, I've had patients on 8,000 or 10,000 morphine equivalents a day. And I mean, it's hard to know whether or not somebody's taking all of those pills, but there's the way they teach you is that the tolerance, there's no real, at least the way they taught the pain docs back then, was that there's no upper limit to the tolerance, right, in terms of what people could have. So I think in answer to the milligrams someone can take without dying, it's much higher than we think it is. And sadly, the illicit fentanyl mixed with the benzos that are coming in to where we work, we're seeing that every day, where we just can't get people comfortable. In terms of the duties as an attorney, that I have no idea. But when we were prescribing meds for pain, what we would tell people is that once your body got used to it, you can drive, you can work, you can do other things like that. Whether the neuroscience studies hold up in terms of driving ability, all that stuff, I can't say. So.
I remember I was watching, I'm not sure where I was watching it, but some of the Purdue commercials back from the 80s or 90s. And they had pictures of people that were gardening and getting their lives back because of these wonderful medications. And I say that kind of...
I saw your eyes,
Yeah.
I saw your eyes.
For anyone on audio didn't see the eyes. And then they showed them kind of 20 years later, and quite unfortunately, these folks were not doing well. And it wasn't the panacea that the drug companies suggested it was. Not to knock our drug companies, but they're pretty easy people to knock sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes.
So, I mean, we didn't fully answer the question, but I think we sort of answered a little bit that the milligrams are much higher than anyone thinks somebody can tolerate.
Yeah, that's the whole thing about tolerance, right? It just keeps going and going, right?
Well, for opiates, it
for the
does.
For
opiates, it does.
For the short-acting opiates.
Yeah. For methadone, it's a bit different because you could have the heart condition, you can die from it and stuff as well. But for the other opiates, that's what they say.
Okay. And
what's next?
Yeah, next one is Teresa Wright. And great point that Teresa makes. I selected this one because she speaks about shame, right? And shame being such a powerful thing for, some of the stories are so fantastic, and not fantastic in a good way, by the way. They're horrible, but just incredible that they're almost unbelievable. The circumstances of these cases. I don't mean it's unbelievable it didn't happen. It's unbelievable that somebody could get to this point if all this is true without having any checks and balances. And why are there no consequences for this individual prior to this, right? Why if the allegations are true, right? So and again, that's the totality of the whole thing, and we're not here to talk specifically about this individual, but the drug side of it. And I guess I wanted to address Teresa's point here. It wasn't really a question, but just saying that the shame is a very powerful thing that can keep people in where they're going, because it's, if you're the kind of patriarch or matriarch of your family, and you're the breadwinner, and you've got maybe a small business, maybe you've got a bunch of employees, and everybody's looking up to you, right? You're supporting a bunch of people, and it's I think it's hard. It is hard for people to take that step down and say, you know what, I'm not doing well right now, and I've got an addiction issue that I've got to look at, right?
Yeah, I would love it if there was a way that we could find a way to address and work through some of the shame, because there's some people who I see where I work with where it doesn't matter how open, how warm, and however I try to be, when they've used substances or they've relapsed, sometimes they don't feel comfortable coming to see me, right? And they sometimes disappear. I do have trouble with quotes like this sometimes, just because it almost implies, I don't want to feel compassion for someone who, it's one of the things is shame is absolutely true. It prevents people from getting help, and there should be a way to work through it. And by no means are we sort of saying that.
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay,
I'm not certainly not suggesting that because.
But for people who use drugs, it's a huge problem where
life can get complicated.
Yeah.
That's the point, right? So
Yeah.
that's the only reason I selected that out. Is shame is very much a motivating factor or a contributing factor to someone not getting care.
It struck me as well, right? Because you noticed the shame piece, and you've experienced that as well. That's prevented you maybe at some points from getting help.
100%.
And I see it all the time clinically, and so I think shame is something that's very, very common and important to figure out how to address.
Yep. Okay. And next one is NY Girl. He is the fattest drug addict I've ever seen. It doesn't make any sense. Supposedly, it's been going on for 10 years, and I don't buy it. Well, the reason I selected this one is I think it's just sort of like, kind of myth busting a little bit, and I'm going to share my own story. As I shared a little earlier, I used crystal meth for 7 years, and typically the image of someone who uses crystal meth is that they are pretty lean and not heavy. But I can tell you that the heaviest I was in my life was when I did crystal meth. I don't know why, but not everything is the stereotype that we think it is. I guess that's the only point I wanted to make about this, not about this individual's weight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and I think kids growing up these days are really exposed to that. Trying to bust some of these stereotypes, right? That really affect people going forward. But yeah, everyone looks different. Everyone can be different, and I think there's not a way that someone who uses drugs looks, right? And I still remember one of the first addiction conferences that I went to. There was a senior guy, really well known and stuff, and he made a statement in a talk that, you can just tell, right? And the whole audience was so upset by that statement. And a few people even went up afterwards and saying, you can't tell just by looking at someone, right? You don't know if they've been using or not. And I think these stereotypes also prevent people that are functioning at a good level. They take a lot of pride in how people perceive them. It prevents them from going to get help.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I can attest to, there are many, I know many that from my own lived experience, very high functioning individuals that are, police officers, family court judge, physicians. There are nurses that are actively using substances and are keeping their stuff together, right? They're keeping their, they're still going to work every day, and that might be frightening for some of us to hear that, but that's a reality, and that's substance use is everywhere. Unfortunately, it's that's just the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next one is from Michael Jackson. This gentleman says he doesn't show any symptoms of withdrawal.
Yeah, and so with withdrawal from opiates, there's different timelines for it. Maybe it's just as someone doesn't have symptoms of withdrawal doesn't mean they don't use opiates. They could be on opiate agonist treatment. They could have already been through the withdrawal. And the time frame for it, I think it's a peak, within 3 to 7 days, 14 to 21, and then for 3 to 6 months, some of the people I've talked to, they'll have random waves of withdrawal that hits them as well, right? And so the absence or presence of withdrawal, although we don't know what the context of this statement was, right? So I think but I think, whether or not somebody has withdrawal symptoms doesn't preclude or exclude you from having substance use.
So this is an interesting one. Carrie's asking us, I would love to hear how this compares to weed.
Yeah, so I mean, part of it depends what Carrie means by this, right? And if this is around opiates, I think that's something where it's quite easy to have a chat around. I also think it's a full topic for another podcast, and we could do it like a didactic, like we would at a lecture, or we can make it conversational. Depends what people want. Just quickly though, opiates work on the opiate receptor, the mu receptor in the brain. It works reward, but it's like an indirect kind of a reward on the ventral tegmental area. It also takes away a lot of fear and anxiety by working through the amygdala and the PAG area as well. It's something that can affect your breathing, where you can die from it and so forth. Weed's a bit different because of the cannabis receptor, and depending on what kind you have, what strain you have, what way that you use it, the impact is very, very quite a bit. And whereas with opiates, if someone likes it, almost everyone is going to develop a tolerance. Almost everyone is going to need higher and higher doses if it's something that they get into. With weed, it's so complicated because the receptors are so ubiquitous. You have these endogenous cannabinoids, you have this external one that you're bringing in, and the big problem with weed is that there's a small subset of people who can develop psychosis with it, or more severe forms of bipolar with it. Not everybody. And then the other thing is because it's from the ground, people assume it's safe, right? And so with weed, it's one of those things that because people think it's safe, they don't realize that 8 to 10% of people that use weed can become addicted or dependent. So
yeah, okay, so yes, that's definitely a topic for its own standalone coverage. So
yep.
If people want to see that, just jot it in the comments and we'll cover it.
So I can read it. So Steve Gallant says, counterfeit oxycodone pills have been killing people on the street for years. The pills pressed with fentanyl, and they're made to look like regular oxycodone pills. I cannot believe this doctor would not know that. Wow, tell the doctor to look up the death of Prince, for example. Yeah, I mean, we do have counterfeit oxycodone pills as well. And in Canada for the last 5-7 years, most of them have really been fentanyl in it.
We don't have the oxy market that the U.S. does, so
it's a different world.
All our pills are fentanyl based, right? And it's something
the illicit ones, yeah.
The
prescribed ones, yeah.
Yeah, are fentanyl based. It's definitely a problem we're dealing with. I mean, every just check out Canada overdose stats, and you'll see that it's a huge problem that we're dealing with every day. And this one is from I'll take this one here from Joseph Smith, and he says he probably he's in quote marks quoting something that Whip said.
Yeah.
Said he probably wishes he didn't have the addiction. And then Joseph's comment back on there saying you must have been the top of your class. Were you the top of your class?
Well, the med school I went to was pass-fail. So I don't know if... I definitely wasn't top of my class. I was...
but you passed.
Yeah, and should I share the joke?
Well, yeah, you've set it up. Let's try.
I've set it up, yeah. So I think, I forget who told me this. I think it was... someone just sort of said, what do you call the person who barely passes medical school?
I don't know. What do you call them?
You call them doctor. It's anyways, probably not funny, but I think this comment was interesting because I had to find it, right? Because I don't remember. I was like, why would I say that he probably wishes he didn't have that addiction? And so I went back to find that quote. And what I was talking about someone with an addiction and what they would do. And then I felt bad about using the word addiction. And the reason is because here in Ontario and here in Canada, we're really moving away from that. So some people don't want to call it addiction medicine anymore because the stigma it brings to people who use drugs. And the idea is that some people want to use drugs, can use it safely, can use it in a healthy way. And by calling it addiction, we're putting our judgment on them. And I almost imagined how... even the idea of saying someone who has an addiction where I don't know them, they haven't used that language, doing that word, I might be making too many sort of assumptions. And I was trying to sort of back it up in some way with it, right? So yeah.
I think this is a perfect. And when I
was very nervous, at the time. Yeah.
So when I read the comment originally, and actually when I heard you say it at the time, I was here, and I thought maybe you misspoke in that, and. But then, I looked at it more carefully, and it's like, I think this is an example. I mean, I think the common sense approach is, well, isn't every addiction bad? I mean, I'm sorry. That's, as someone who's struggled with addiction for many years of my life, I can tell you every addiction has been bad for me. I don't have a good addiction, and I've not seen any good addictions, but the pendulum has kind of swung so far from where we can call that out just in a, kind of in a language politically correct way, is that, I'm willing to say every addiction is bad. So
I'm not actually, and a big part of that is that there's some people who use drugs that don't see it as a problem. They find the word addiction somewhat judgmental and offensive, and it's much easier to use harm reduction language to talk to them and than to label it as an addiction.
All right, and our next point is from Stephen Gallant again, great contributor here. He says, in my small town, Suboxone can be found on any street corner, and it's cheaper than the pharmacy.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me at all, right? And a big part is that, buprenorphine is covered by certain drug plans. It's covered by certain government agencies and stuff, and it is quite available now. There's some regions where it's easier to get buprenorphine than it is to get hydromorphone, and then you'll find that the addiction to buprenorphine is sometimes there as well. The value of buprenorphine is that it doesn't stop people's breathing. And then the other thing is a lot of people don't know this, but you don't have to go through withdrawal to start buprenorphine anymore. And so say if I was using a certain amount of fentanyl, I was using a certain amount of oxys, I could slowly go on the buprenorphine without experiencing withdrawal. I can get it up to a good dose, and I can stop the fentanyl or the oxys pretty comfortably.
I think we should do an episode on how to do that.
How to do the microdosing.
Yeah. I mean, because if people, I shared in the original video this about a gentleman that was that purchased illicit Suboxone, illicit buprenorphine, and but he didn't know how to do it.
Can I do a couple sessions on buprenorphine? I've got like 2 hours of material, 3 hours of material.
You absolutely can do 2 hours.
I used to get so excited about this, but now in Ontario, so many people are prescribing it. I don't need to spread the message. But I mean, looking at the people who clicked on this thing, maybe.
Yeah. Well, especially after reading what, Stephen said, that, it's available in every street corner. Well, this, maybe some people don't know how to use it as well, right? Don't know how to do.
They may not know about the microdosing.
Yeah, and let's get that knowledge out there. There's no harm in sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, and it will be standard of care soon. I mean.
Yeah. So, and I think we have to keep spreading that word. So there are people writing more and more people writing scripts, but until every family doctor is willing to write it, I think we still need to advocate for it. No?
Yeah, no, you're right. And here we just have so many clinics that are dropping that habit. That's why I've sort of stopped. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in urban areas, yes, but I don't think you'd say that in the rural areas, right? It's not all there, right? Not everybody's doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Some people are still intimidated to prescribe this. And all right, so the last one is not a question at all, but I just thought it was such a inspirational. It felt so good that and there's so many of them that did. So from Deb, who said, Dr. Lamba, so enjoyed your interview and cadence. Your compassion shines through. Thank you, JP. Thank you thank you as well for your honesty. Is the great healer.
It was quite a big leap, for both of us to put our voices out there. We'd done about 3-4 years of the ECHO education, so small groups, about 40 to 80 online people around it, and we've both educated, or done educations for residents and staff. It's quite something else to put it out for the general public. It really affects us that there's so many evidence-based treatments that just people don't know about, that they're not aware of. And so forth. And so even though we were nervous, I think it's something that's very important to have basic substance use knowledge out there. And a comment like this goes such a long way. And it almost gave me that energy to deal with whatever comments and criticisms that came up, because now we have X number of people that saw it, that heard you say and heard me say that, hey, just because you do drugs doesn't make you a criminal.
Right.
They heard me and you say that, hey, shame is a big part of it. That's sometimes why the cycle continues. There's so much shame. People know about withdrawal. They might have heard about opiate agonist treatment. And so there's all these things that aren't common knowledge. And honestly, in North America, how many people are dying of opiate use disorder? It's like nuts, right? It's nuts how many people are. And the treatments work really, really well for a large subset of the people who use drugs.
100%.
Yeah.
So so thank you very much. I'm been absolutely this has been an absolutely humbling experience, and I'm so happy that you checked it out. And if there's things you want us to cover, put it in the comments. And let's see where this community grows to.
Yeah. And thank you all for watching and staying tuned and being genuinely curious. Thank you for all the comments that were sharing your opinion and wanting to sort of correct certain misbeliefs. And hopefully this is a place where some dialogue can continue.
Absolutely. Thank you.